The marble floors gleamed under the golden light of the chandeliers. Every step echoed like a whisper of wealth. Guests in designer suits floated through the air, their perfume mixing with the faint scent of polished stone and fresh lilies. It was the kind of place where even silence felt expensive. But when a weary traveler stepped through the revolving doors, that silence cracked. His name was Ethan Cole. 14 hours of travel had drained the color from his face. His shirt was creased, his hair untidy, his shoes scuffed from airport terminals. Yet there was something calm about him, a quiet steadiness. He wheeled in a modest suitcase and clutched a small leather folder close to his chest. Inside it, his reservation for a week's stay at the prestigious Imperial Crest Hotel. At the front desk stood Victor Hale, the hotel manager. Every inch of him screamed perfection: slicked back hair, manicured nails, a watch that could pay a month's rent. He was the kind of man who smiled without warmth, the kind of man who measured worth at first glance. Victor's eyes narrowed the moment he saw Ethan. "Excuse me," Ethan began politely. "I have a reservation." Victor didn't answer. He looked him up and down, then turned to a nearby receptionist. "Who let him in here?" The receptionist hesitated, caught between obedience and discomfort. "Sir, he says he has—" "I heard him," Victor interrupted. "But this establishment maintains standards." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm sure you do," he said softly. "Now, if you could just check—" "Identification," Victor snapped. "And please don't touch the counter." The lobby went still. Conversations dimmed. People began to watch. Ethan calmly pulled out his ID and placed it beside the leather folder. "My luggage was delayed," he said. "It's been a long trip." Victor glanced at the computer screen, found Ethan's name, and frowned. The executive suite. Booked for a full week. Paid in advance. That didn't fit the picture standing before him. "This can't be right," Victor murmured. Then louder, "We'll need to verify payment." Ethan nodded and offered his black card. Victor took it between two fingers as if it were contagious. "Let's make sure this isn't stolen, shall we?" Gasps rippled through the lobby. Guests looked up from their cocktails. Someone began recording on their phone. Ethan's voice remained even. "There's no need to make a scene. I can provide another card if necessary." "Oh, I think there's been enough of a scene already," Victor said with a smirk. "You might be more comfortable somewhere, less refined." A few staff members chuckled under their breath. One young woman at the desk, Clara Nguyen, did not. She looked at Ethan with quiet sympathy, her hands fidgeting nervously under the counter. Victor leaned closer. "We can't have imposters disturbing our guests." "Security!" Two guards appeared almost instantly. Ethan blinked, taken aback. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I have confirmation right here." Victor waved him off. "Save your stories for someone who cares." The guards grabbed Ethan by the arms. His suitcase toppled, spilling papers and a laptop bag across the marble floor. Among them, a slim portfolio slid open, revealing documents stamped with Imperial Crest Holdings. Victor noticed it, but didn't care. He kicked it aside. "Take him out," he said coldly, "before he embarrasses himself further." The guards began dragging Ethan toward the exit. His voice was steady, but something in it carried quiet steel. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Hale." Victor smiled thinly. "I doubt that." Phones recorded as Ethan was forced through the revolving doors out into the rain-slicked street. His belongings scattered across the pavement, papers fluttering like fallen feathers. He stood there for a moment, drenched and motionless, his expression unreadable. Then he bent down, gathered his papers one by one, and tucked the leather folder beneath his arm. As he looked up at the glittering hotel sign above him, his calm returned, cold and deliberate. He whispered to himself, "Let's begin." Rain streaked down the glass tower of the Imperial Crest as Ethan walked away, his soaked jacket clinging to his frame. He moved with quiet precision, every step calculated. The humiliation still burned, but beneath it was something sharper: purpose. He turned the corner into a quiet side street and entered a black sedan waiting under the dim glow of a streetlight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and coffee. A voice from the driver's seat spoke without turning. "Sir, was the evaluation completed?" Ethan removed his wet jacket, folding it neatly beside him. "More than completed," he said. "Prepare for activation." The driver nodded and pressed a code into a concealed console. Within minutes, secure signals began bouncing across continents. Inside the company's main server, silent alerts triggered in departments labeled Legal Security and Operations Oversight. In a penthouse office across the city, Marion Blake, Chief Legal Officer of the Crest Group, received the encrypted message, "Initiate Protocol Orion, Priority 1. She knew what it meant. Ethan Cole, the company's new majority owner, had finished another undercover assessment. And this one had gone very, very wrong. Back in the car, Ethan stared out the window, watching the hotel's lights shimmer in the distance. "They think I'm invisible when I don't wear a suit," he said softly. "Let's see how they act when they realize who they just threw out." At sunrise, Victor Hale strutted through the hotel's employee entrance, his polished shoes clicking like a metronome of self-satisfaction. He sipped espresso, already rehearsing the story he'd tell upper management, how he'd protected the hotel's image from a suspicious drifter. The security team laughed at his jokes, their voices echoing through the hallway. But as he entered his office, something felt off. His phone was dead. The security cameras showed static, and sitting at his desk was a woman he didn't recognize. Tailored gray suit, calm eyes, corporate badge clipped to her lapel. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said. "Grace Patel, Corporate Security Compliance. We're conducting an unannounced audit." Victor's confidence faltered. "Audit? I wasn't informed." "That's the point of an unannounced audit," Grace replied evenly. "We'll need full access to all footage and employee reports from yesterday." Victor's mind raced. He'd ordered the footage deleted. "The system's under maintenance," he bluffed. Grace typed something into her tablet. "That's odd," she said. "We've already recovered the files from off-site storage. Care to explain why the local copies were erased?" The walls seemed to close in. He forced a laugh. "Must be a glitch," Grace didn't smile. "We'll determine that." She signaled 2 technicians who moved past him and began downloading data from his terminals. Downstairs, whispers spread fast. Uniformed people from corporate were everywhere, HR, legal, security, all moving in coordinated silence. The staff sensed something monumental was happening but didn't know what. In the lobby, Clara Nguyen noticed the tension. She remembered the man from last night, the one they had dragged out. Her conscience had kept her awake. And when she saw the corporate badges now filling the room, she suspected the truth. That man wasn't just a guest. He was someone powerful. By midday, the staff was ordered into the main conference room. The air buzzed with fear. People speculated about layoffs, about a surprise inspection, about budget cuts. Victor entered, his perfect posture cracking under invisible pressure. The doors opened again and the room fell silent. Ethan Cole walked in. Not the disheveled traveler from last night, but the man he truly was. His suit was pressed, his expression composed. The air around him carried quiet authority. Every person who had laughed, sneered, or filmed now stared in disbelief. Victor rose slowly, forcing a smile. Mr. Cole, I didn't realize." Ethan's calm cut through the tension like glass. "You didn't need to realize who I was. You only needed to realize who you were supposed to be." The room stayed silent except for the soft hum of the projector as Ethan nodded to Grace. She tapped a tablet, and footage from the previous night appeared on the wall. Victor's cruel words. The laughter, the rough handling every humiliating second. People turned away in shame. Some covered their faces. Clara stared at the floor, remembering how she'd wanted to speak up but couldn't. Ethan spoke quietly, but his words carried to every corner. This wasn't about one man being insulted. It was about a culture that decided dignity could be priced. Victor tried to interrupt, voice trembling. "You don't understand. I was protecting what?" Ethan asked. "The marble floors? The illusion of class?" He took a step closer. "Luxury doesn't come from exclusion, Mr. Hale. It comes from humanity." Victor had no answer. His eyes darted to the security team at the door, realizing too late that they were not there for protection. Ethan continued. "Every person in this building will be reviewed. Those who mocked and mistreated will face consequences. Those who showed conscience will help rebuild what you destroyed." The room was dead still. Even breathing seemed forbidden. Effective immediately, Ethan said. This hotel closes for retraining. And Victor Hale, your employment ends today. Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came. His own guard stepped forward, taking his access badge. Ethan turned to the remaining staff. The world's watching how we treat one another. Let's give them something worth watching. Outside, the city buzzed as if unaware of the storm breaking inside the Imperial Crest. But by nightfall, word would spread of a hotel where arrogance met its reckoning, and a leader who refused to let cruelty hide behind marble walls. And as Ethan watched Victor escorted out into the same rain that had soaked him the night before, he whispered again, "Now it begins." The lobby that once shimmered with false perfection now echoed with uneasy whispers. After Ethan's reveal, the Imperial Crest no longer felt untouchable. Its walls seemed thinner, its luxury hollow. The very staff who had laughed the day before now couldn't even meet one another's eyes. Victor Hale stood outside on the hotel's granite steps. Stripped of his badge, his tie loosened, his arrogance dissolving into disbelief. He had spent his career commanding others, but now every passing second reminded him of the one truth he had forgotten. Power built on cruelty doesn't last. Inside, the investigation began in full force. The HR department took over the top floor. Legal teams combed through security reports, emails, and employee records. Every detail of the previous night's incident was reviewed, not just for punishment, but to uncover the culture that had allowed it to happen. Ethan sat in a temporary conference room, his sleeves rolled, a tablet in front of him filled with data. "I don't want public apologies or PR stunts," he told his senior team. "I want change that sticks." Marion Blake nodded, scrolling through the footage. "The behavior wasn't isolated," she said. "There are patterns. Reports ignored. Complaints filed and buried. This runs deeper than one hotel." Ethan leaned back. "Then we start at the roots." Meanwhile, Clara sat outside the HR office waiting to be called in. Her stomach turned as she replayed the previous night in her mind. The way she froze when Victor raised his voice. The moment she looked away instead of speaking up. When her name was called, she entered the room expecting discipline. But instead of reprimand, Ethan himself was waiting inside. "Miss Nguyen," he said softly, "you didn't join the others when they mocked me." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't stop them either." "That's why you're here," Ethan replied. "You knew it was wrong. Fear kept you silent, but integrity kept you from joining in. Fear can be unlearned. Integrity can't." He handed her a folder. Inside was a letter of promotion. "We're rebuilding this place from the ground up. I want people who remember what respect looks like. Help me train them." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "I won't let you down." That evening, the Imperial Crest closed its doors to guests for the first time in 30 years. News spread quickly through the industry. A top luxury chain was suspending operations for a complete overhaul after a scandal involving discrimination. Reporters camped outside, cameras flashing as black cars entered and left the property. But Ethan refused interviews. When a journalist finally caught him stepping into his car, she shouted, "Mr. Cole, are you trying to save your brand or your conscience?" He stopped, turned to face her, and said calmly, "Both." Over the next 2 weeks, the retraining program began. Hundreds of staff members attended daily sessions led by psychologists, ethicists, and hospitality veterans. Videos of real incidents were analyzed. Conversations about bias, empathy, and service filled the halls that once echoed only with gossip and pretension. The transformation wasn't easy. Some employees quit, claiming the new culture was too idealistic. Others stayed, determined to prove they could be better. Slowly, the Imperial Crest began to change from within. Across the city, Victor Hale's life unraveled in silence. He tried calling his former contacts in the hospitality world, but none returned his messages. His reputation had spread faster than he could react. One day he received a formal notice. His name had been placed on the Global Hospitality Registry under the heading, Professional Misconduct. He stared at the screen, the words blurring. Everything he had built was gone. For the first time, he realized that all the luxury he'd surrounded himself with had been a cage. Beautiful, empty, and built on the suffering of others. At the same time, Ethan convened a secret meeting at corporate headquarters. Around the long mahogany table sat the company's senior executives. Charts of every hotel in the chain glowed on wall-mounted screens. This, Ethan said, pointing to declining customer satisfaction scores, is the cost of arrogance disguised as elegance. He played recordings of hidden evaluations from other hotels, similar stories of staff treating guests differently based on appearance. The silence in the room was suffocating. "This is our culture," Ethan said quietly. "Not just Victor Hale's. Ours. And we will fix it no matter the cost." Marion exchanged a knowing glance with the operations chief. "Reform at this scale will be expensive." Ethan's reply was immediate. "Not as expensive as losing our soul." The decision was unanimous. The Imperial Crest would not just reopen, it would redefine luxury. As plans unfolded, Ethan's reform began rippling outward. Other hotels in the group received notices of policy restructuring. Anonymous evaluations were ordered. Guest treatment would now be scored by equality and empathy, not appearances. And in the midst of it all, one unexpected report reached Ethan's desk. Victor Hale had filed a lawsuit, claiming wrongful termination and public humiliation. Attached was the signature of a notorious attorney known for exploiting corporate scandals. Ethan read it once, closed the folder, and said quietly, "He hasn't learned yet." The game wasn't over. The lesson had only just begun. 3 months passed before the courtroom lights burned bright. Cameras lined the marble hallway outside, reporters pressing close, hungry for scandal. Ethan Cole stepped out of a black sedan, calm as ever, his composure carved from the same restraint that had guided him since the night of his humiliation. Across the room, Victor Hale stood beside his attorney, a man known for tearing corporations apart, Samuel Wexler, a lawyer who saw morality as theater and headlines as profit. Wexler's grin was practiced, sharp. "We're not just suing for wrongful termination," he said to the reporters. "We're suing for a man's dignity." Ethan ignored the noise and walked straight into the hearing. Inside, the tension was thick enough to taste. Wexler opened with passion. "My client was unfairly fired for protecting hotel standards. The new owner staged an entrapment, disguising himself as a homeless man to provoke outrage. This wasn't justice, it was vengeance." Victor's face remained still, but a flicker of pride glinted in his eyes. He thought the performance was working. Ethan didn't speak until called. When he rose, the murmurs died instantly. "There was no entrapment," he said simply. "There was exposure." He motioned to his legal chief, Marion Blake, who connected a tablet to the courtroom display. The footage played, Victor's insults, his laughter, his orders. The moment Ethan was thrown out, the murmurs turned to silence. Ethan continued. This was not one man enforcing rules. It was a pattern of cruelty embedded in a system that rewarded arrogance. Wexler stood, smirking. "And yet you, a billionaire, played dress-up to trick hardworking employees. Surely even you see the hypocrisy?" Ethan didn't flinch. "If it takes dressing down to see the truth, then maybe wealth hides more blindness than I thought." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. Wexler scrambled to pivot. "This so-called pattern, do you have proof beyond one night?" Marion tapped the screen again. Dozens of documents appeared. Employee complaints buried by management. Guest reports ignored. Internal memos instructing staff to prioritize desirable appearances. Victor's color drained. He whispered urgently to his lawyer, but Wexler was already losing ground. Then Marion played the final recording. Victor's voice filled the courtroom, cold and unmistakable. "Help me fix this, Clara. Retract your report or you'll never work again." A collective breath shuddered through the room. The judge's expression turned to stone. Ethan said nothing more. He didn't need to. Afterward, as the court recessed, Wexler pulled Victor aside, whispering harshly, "You didn't tell me they had that recording. We're finished." Victor stared through him, realizing that the career he once ruled had vanished. That evening, the settlement was finalized. Victor would receive nothing but a confidentiality clause and a final warning. One more public outburst and the company would make every file public. He signed, his hand trembling. Ethan watched him without triumph, only quiet resolve. "Redemption isn't something you buy," he said. "It's something you earn by facing what you've done." Victor didn't answer. He left the building alone, but the story didn't end there. A week later, a media leak exploded. The footage of Victor's treatment of Ethan appeared online, spreading across every platform. Clips replayed endlessly. His insults, the shove, the arrogance. Hashtags calling for accountability trended worldwide. The world didn't see a corporate scandal. They saw a mirror. The story wasn't about a CEO. It was about how people treat others when they believe they'll never be held accountable. Ethan's team gathered in the boardroom, screens glowing with the viral chaos. The PR chief looked anxious. "We can try damage control," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "We let it play. The world deserves to see why we changed." And instead of sinking, the company rose higher than ever. Media outlets called the transformation a revolution in hospitality ethics. Universities studied it. Competitors began rewriting their policies. The name Ethan Cole became synonymous with accountability. But behind every headline was a quieter truth. Change wasn't about punishment. It was about rediscovering humanity in places that had forgotten it. Months later, Ethan walked through the doors of the newly reopened Imperial Crest. The marble gleamed brighter. But what mattered most was invisible. The atmosphere felt lighter, warmer. Guests were greeted not with evaluation, but with sincerity. He paused by the front desk where Clara stood in her new role as guest relations director. She smiled, confident and composed. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole." Ethan smiled. "It feels like home again." He walked through the lobby where a young traveler, rumpled from a long flight, was being checked in with care and respect. No glances of judgment, no hidden smirks, just genuine hospitality. And somewhere across town, in a small community center, Victor Hale stood in front of a group of volunteers teaching communication and empathy to new recruits. His voice carried none of its old arrogance. "Respect isn't given to those who look powerful," he said quietly. "It's given to those who remember what it means to be human." Ethan read the report of Victor's new work months later and closed the folder. Then maybe he finally learned, he said to himself. He turned toward the window overlooking the city skyline. A faint smile crossed his face, one born not of victory, but of restoration. The world outside glittered with possibilities again, and this time Ethan Cole knew. True power didn't come from being feared or admired. It came from proving that dignity could change everything. A year after the storm, the Imperial Crest stood taller than before. Its crystal chandeliers sparkled as always, but now the light seemed softer, warmer, alive with something new. Guests arrived from every corner of the world. Business travelers, families, artists, even backpackers. No one was turned away. No one was judged. Ethan Cole stepped through the revolving doors quietly that morning. The scent of fresh coffee and polished marble filled the air. Staff greeted him with genuine smiles. None of them knew this was another unannounced visit. That was exactly how he wanted it. He moved through the lobby unnoticed at first, watching how everyone treated one another. A bellhop rushed to help an elderly couple with their bags. A housekeeper stopped to return a child's lost toy. A concierge leaned down to speak gently with a guest whose English was broken, her patience unshaken. Ethan took it all in with quiet pride. Clara spotted him from across the room. She no longer carried the nervous air of a junior clerk. She moved with the calm assurance of a leader. Her suit was simple, her posture confident. "Mr. Cole," she said warmly, extending a hand. "Welcome home," he smiled. "You've done remarkable work, Clara." "We all have," she replied. "The hotel feels different now. It feels human." Ethan nodded, and together they walked through the corridors that once echoed with fear. Now laughter floated in the air. Team meetings filled with collaboration instead of tension. Behind the front desk hung a small bronze plaque with an inscription, "Luxury is kindness made visible." Later that day, Ethan gathered the entire staff in the grand conference hall, the same room where he had once revealed his identity. But this time there was no fear, no shame, only anticipation. He looked out at the faces before him. "A year ago," he began, "this place stood for everything wrong with success. We confused image with worth, wealth with wisdom, status with service. But you changed that. You proved that true excellence has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with empathy." He paused, letting the words settle. The world saw our worst moment. But they also saw what happened next. The Imperial Crest didn't hide, it learned. It grew. And now it leads. Applause filled the room, not polite or rehearsed, but heartfelt. Ethan continued. "Each of you carries this standard now. When you greet someone, when you serve a guest, when you solve a problem, remember this. Greatness is not how high we stand, but how we lift others." After the meeting, Ethan slipped away to the lounge overlooking the city. Evening sunlight spilled through the tall windows, coating everything in gold. Across the room, he noticed a familiar figure sitting quietly, a man with gray at his temples. Dressed in simple clothes, reading a worn notebook, Victor Hale looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes for the first time since that day. There was no bitterness left, only humility. He rose slowly and approached. "I heard about your new outreach program," Ethan said. "It's good work," Victor nodded. "It's different, but it feels right. Teaching young people not to make the same mistakes I did. It's become my way of paying back what I broke." Ethan extended his hand. "Then maybe we both learned something." Victor hesitated, then shook it. "Thank you for giving me the chance to change even when I didn't deserve it." Ethan's voice softened. "We all deserve the chance to change. It's what makes progress possible." Victor smiled faintly and left, blending into the evening crowd outside. When Ethan turned back toward the window, the city lights had begun to glow. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel at peace. The empire he had built was no longer about prestige. It was about purpose. Before leaving, he wrote a short note and left it at the front desk for Clara. The measure of greatness isn't how the world sees us when we succeed, but how we act when no one's watching. Keep leading with heart. That night, a new guest arrived, exhausted, travel-worn, clothes wrinkled from a long journey. The kind of guest who might once have been turned away. Clara walked to the counter and smiled. "Welcome to the Imperial Crest," she said. "We're glad you're here." The guest blinked, surprised by the warmth. "Even looking like this?" he asked jokingly. Clara laughed softly. "Especially looking like that. Let's get you settled." As Ethan watched quietly from the far corner, the circle completed itself. The lesson, once painful, had transformed into something beautiful, an unspoken promise that no one would ever be made to feel small again. Outside, rain began to fall gently against the glass just as it had that first night. But this time it sounded different, like renewal, not ruin. Ethan stepped into the street, the lights reflecting in the puddles at his feet. The hotel behind him glowed like a beacon, no longer a monument to vanity, but a symbol of what change could look like when compassion took the lead. He whispered to himself, "We finally got it right." And for the first time since that long, humiliating night, he smiled, not for victory, but for the quiet truth that dignity, once restored, shines brighter than any chandelier. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds after a night of steady rain. The Imperial Crest glowed beneath the golden sky, each drop on its glass facade sparkling like proof that storms could end beautifully. Ethan arrived early, walking through the courtyard garden he had redesigned a year ago. He paused by the fountain where a bronze plaque read, "Integrity builds empires stronger than marble." He was no longer the hidden owner or the distant executive. People greeted him by name now, not out of fear but out of respect. And still, he remembered the weight of that first night, the sting of being cast aside. That memory kept him humble. It reminded him why all of this mattered. As he entered the lobby, a small commotion near the front desk caught his attention. A group of new trainees stood in a semicircle, listening to Clara as she explained the core values of the company. Her tone was patient but firm. "Every guest who walks through those doors brings a story," she said. "You don't need to know it. You just need to make sure they feel like they belong here." Ethan lingered unseen at the edge of the group. The words hit him like a quiet echo of his own philosophy, now living through someone else's voice. The change was no longer dependent on him. It had become part of the place itself. Suddenly, the doors swung open. A man stumbled in, drenched and anxious, clutching a small briefcase. He looked lost, muttering that he had a meeting but no reservation. Years ago, that would have been enough to trigger disdain. But now Clara stepped forward, calm and kind. "Sir, please take a seat. Let me see how we can help you," she said, offering him a towel and a cup of water. The staff followed her lead, moving with quiet efficiency. Within minutes, the man relaxed, his shaking hand stilling. Ethan smiled faintly. This was the real test, and they had passed without even knowing it. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from Marion Blake lit up the screen. "Media request for your presence at the World Hospitality Summit. They want you to speak about ethical leadership." Ethan typed back, "I'll attend. Let's set it for next month." Then he looked back at the lobby once more before heading toward his office. Weeks later, the grand auditorium was filled with hundreds of industry leaders, cameras, journalists, executives, all waiting to hear from the man whose quiet revolution had changed an entire field. Ethan stood backstage for a moment, reflecting on how a single act of prejudice had led to this day. When he walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate, but he raised a hand to quiet it. "Thank you," he began. "But this moment isn't about applause. It's about remembering how easily we lose sight of who we are when success blinds us." The hall grew still. He continued, voice steady, eyes focused. "A year ago, I stood in the lobby of my own hotel and was told I didn't belong. That moment changed me. Not because it hurt my pride, but because it revealed how far we'd drifted from the heart of hospitality." He paused, letting the silence breathe. "Luxury isn't gold or glass. It's kindness. It's patience. It's looking at someone and seeing a person instead of a price tag." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some executives looked uncomfortable, others deeply moved. Ethan went on. "We've spent decades chasing prestige, but the future belongs to those who serve with integrity. Because no matter how beautiful the building, if there's no compassion inside, it's already collapsing." The room erupted in applause that didn't stop for several minutes. Cameras flashed, but Ethan wasn't looking at them. He was thinking of that first night. The rain, the marble floor, the laughter that had turned into his awakening. After the event, journalists swarmed him for interviews, but he declined most of them. Instead, he slipped out a side exit and found himself walking alone through the quiet evening streets. He passed a small cafe where a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Cole!" It was Victor Hale, seated at a corner table, dressed simply, sipping coffee. The bitterness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something lighter. "I saw your speech," he said. "You spoke the truth." Ethan nodded. "You helped teach it." Victor smiled sadly. "You could have ruined me completely, but instead you gave me a chance to become better. That's something I'll never forget." Ethan sat across from him for a moment. "People only grow when they're shown the cost of their blindness. I didn't forgive you to spare you. I did it to remind myself that leadership without empathy isn't leadership at all." They sat in silence for a while, two men who had started as enemies now bound by the same lesson. When Ethan finally rose to leave, Victor said, "You were right that night. I made a miscalculation." Ethan smiled softly. "So did I. I underestimated what people are capable of when they're given the chance to rise instead of fall." Later that night, Ethan returned to the Imperial Crest. He took the elevator to the rooftop terrace where the city stretched out beneath him. The wind carried the faint hum of life from below, laughter, footsteps, music drifting through open windows. He thought of the hundreds of lives inside his hotels, the thousands of guests they welcomed, and the countless acts of quiet decency happening every day. He whispered to the wind, "This is what power was always meant to do, not to control but to elevate." Somewhere deep inside, he knew his journey wasn't over. There would be other challenges, other storms, but now he carried a truth that couldn't be shaken. Change begins in the smallest moments, in the way one person treats another when no one's watching. The lights of the Imperial Crest shimmered below like constellations, and as Ethan stood there watching them, he understood that this was the real climax, not the fall, not the revenge, but the redemption that followed. The marble floors, once symbols of division, now reflected a gentler kind of shine. The light of people who had learned that respect, once given freely, could transform the world. Ethan turned away from the skyline and headed inside, ready for whatever came next, knowing he had finally built something that no storm could ever wash away.